Great to have you join us, and I love hearing the sounds of children, but I know it's also time for kids to go out to real kids downstairs, and if you're a parent, I love that I can hear the sound of babies and stuff like that, but if you feel comfortable in the creche, our creche is kind of, Ben said before, where the fireside room's kind of out the back and hang a right. If you want to sit out there, there's a live feed and things like that, and if you feel comfortable, you can... It is on. I need to talk really, really loudly. What we have here is a failure to communicate. Can you hear me? Okay. Did you hear what I was saying before about the kids and the... It's my gentle voice. My gentle voice, which my children have always heard that gentle voice. I still can't hear me. I think we'll be right now. I feel like I've switched the mute button on and off 3 times, and thank you. Are you saying that because I'd switched the mute button on or mute button off? Ben shared a couple of things which I think are really exciting. Can I just add a couple of things to that? Ben said that we've got 3 baptisms coming up over the next couple of weeks. One of the things that's happened over the last few years is that most of our baptisms have been in an outdoors environment now. Most of our people want to get baptised in a very public setting, which is fantastic. And some of you might not know where those baptisms are. Partly the reason is probably because you don't receive our weekly news. So in our weekly news, we've had kind of details about that. So can I say, if you want to get kind of updates about what's happening in the life of the church, if you can leave your details with the welcome desk, that'd be great, because we'd love to communicate that with you. Next week, Ivana's getting baptised down at Safety Beach. It's an important place for her. And Ainsley's getting baptised at Warrandyte at Pound Bend on the Sunday. And Alex is getting baptised at Pound Bend and Warrandyte the week after. So if you want to be a part of those, we would love to have you join us. It's the hearts of people when they do that is to wanting to... express their faith in a public environment is really great. And I was catching up with Ivana a couple of weeks ago, and it was just a beautiful thing to be able to hear her tell me part of her story and how this transformation has been part of her life. So if you want to hear it straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, straight from the lady's mouth, Safety Beach would be wonderful. We do video them and have them available as well, but that'd be great, and I'm sure they would appreciate your support. Also, if you weren't here last week, we began our Above and Beyond campaign. There is handouts of letters which are available from the welcome desk if you want to pick up one of those from the welcome desk if you weren't here. Also, the letter and things like that are online. One of the things that we did want to draw your attention to, I think it was on there as a slide of a save the date, is on March the 15th, we're going to be inviting the entire church community, March the 15th, March 16th, for an extended time of prayer. And so what I would ask you to do is to put that date aside for us as a church community as we collectively come and pray. It's actually a significant part of what we do. In fact, I actually think that prayer is intrinsically related to what I'm actually going to speak about today. Over this series, we're sharing about what our church values are. And the value that we're talking about today is called Centered on God. And it has kind of a subline of this. It says exalting God, but humbling self. And I actually think that prayer expresses that. Prayer is a pattern of behavior that expresses that. It says, you know what? It says, I realize that I can't do things in my own strength. It says, I need you, God, to work. You can do things which are far beyond what we can ever imagine. And so prayer is a behaviour which expresses that value. And so I'd like to invite you to be a part of those things. That would be great if you could do that. Now, the 10 Commandments are in many ways, the defining moral rule book of the Western world. It doesn't matter whether someone is religious or not, whether they have church experience or not. The phrase, even if maybe not the detail, are seen as kind of standards of some sort of moral life. I don't know about you, but when you read them, Some of them feel easy to violate. I remember as a teenager, I think it's the third one there. No, it's the fifth one. Gee, I should know them, shouldn't I? I mean, that's part of any pastor. They should memorise these things. As a teenager, honour your father and mother didn't seem like something that I could do all the time. Some translation says obey. It was one of those ones that I felt like, oh, that's a bit of a trouble. Some of them, though, I kind of felt safe about. Don't kill. Don't commit adultery. But the problem is when you read some of them, is the more that you understand, and especially when Jesus delivers the Sermon on the Mount and he says, don't kill. Well, if you hate someone, that's essentially the same thing. All of a sudden it kind of broadened them and made it, oh, dearie me. But there was always one of them that I felt really safe with. Which one? The first one. The first one. I thought maybe the first of the commandments there was meant to be kind of like a warm-up before you got into the real guts of the commandments. I mean, I don't have a golden Buddha statue at home. When I go to the MCG, I don't kneel down and genuflect before the Bradman statue. When Warnie was bowling, I didn't feel the need to call in, to join in with the crowd and to kind of bow down and chant his name. I mean, I might love the music of an entertainer, but I've never really had a poster on my wall. Didn't feel the need to be defined in some particular way, call myself a Swiftie or something like that. My daughter was at the concert last night, so I just feel like I have to give a shout out to Taylor Swift. If you don't know who that is, don't worry, you're just not as cool as us older people. I always felt safe. Always felt safe. Psalm 121 is a song that the Jewish people would sing as they climbed the mountain leading up to Jerusalem. To give you an idea, Jerusalem is about 750 metres above sea level. So to put that in perspective, Mount Dandenong is 630 metres above sea level. Right? So they would go to kind of festivals and they would walk from their hometown, scattered all around different parts of Israel, but they would walk up the mountain. You can imagine it was quite a long walk, and they would sing as they walked up and chant different lines. This is the first lines of Psalm 121. I'm not going to sing them for you, unfortunately. It says this, it says, I look up to the mountains. Does my help come from there? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. Now, Israel is kind of geographically for Australians quite a small country, but it's quite mountainous. And so the people in all sorts of different places would walk along, and as they did, they would see many hills. It would cause them all sorts of different reactions as they would see those hills. Sometimes it would have this sense in this psalm of calling out to help because they had a sense of fear or that they might stumble. Well, because maybe as they looked to the mountains, they would fear what was within them. Who was hiding in those mountains? Thieves and bandits was kind of this common sense of fear in that era. But for the Jewish people in ancient times, there was even more than just the fear of thieves and bandits. You see, Palestine at this particular time is overrun with pagan worship, and most of it was practiced on hilltops. To get closer to the gods, you would set up a shrine on top of the hill. So sacred prostitutes would be there to enhance the fertility of the land. The temples and idols were there to make people feel good and to deal with their struggles. And so you could go and invoke spells and protections for the perils of life. If you fear the heat, pray to the sun god. If you fear the moon, go to the moon priestess and get an amulet. If you were haunted by demons, go to a shrine and learn some magical formula or chant. This is what a Jewish person of that era would see. No help from the mountains normally. In fact, they contained false sources of help, these idols. Well, fortunately for us in the 21st century, we don't have many temples and pagan idols potted around our suburbs, do we? Do we? Or do we? I mean, where do we look for help? What do we worship? What do I lift my eyes up to? Because in its simplest term, in its simplest expression, an idol is anything we worship. An idol is anything that is more important to you than God. It's anything that absorbs your heart and imagination more than God. Anything that you seek to give or take from what only God can provide. Anything that is so central and essential to life, if you were to lose it, you would have a sense of maybe life's not worth living. You see, it's not just statues of Buddha or Bradman or Taylor Swift. In fact, anything in life can serve as an idol. Paul sums this up as he describes the state of humanity in Romans chapter 1, this letter that he writes to the Roman church. He says, they traded the truth, he's talking about humanity, they traded the truth about God for a lie. They worshipped and served the things that God created instead of the Creator himself. The things that God created instead of God himself. And so anything in our life, anything that we can kind of almost say in our heart of hearts, if I have that, then my life has meaning. I'll know value. I'll have a sense of significance or security. We may not burn incense to Artemis, but when other items are raised to cosmic proportions, we actually worship a different idol. Because if we look to something else to give us hope, meaning, and love, something that's created, we're worshipping an idol that will inevitably falter. You know, our hearts deify idols as the center of our lives because we think that they are the most significant. There are times that we actually think that idols are only bad things. Idols are things like Taylor Swift. Idols are things like maybe money. But I got news for you today. Our idols can be even things which are good. Things which are important for life, helpful for life. But we've elevated them to such an extent that they become the only thing in our life. As a people, we are quick to mass produce idols. Anything to take the place of God. The Bible actually talks in a variety of different metaphors about how people relate to the idols of our hearts. It tells us sometimes that we love idols, that we trust them, we obey them. Idols can control us when we feel like we must have them. If we don't, life is meaningless. Madonna was interviewed, the artist Madonna was interviewed in a Vogue magazine interview a number of years ago, and she said this. She said, "My drive in life comes from a fear of being mediocre. It's always pushing me. I push past one spell of it and discover myself as a special human being. But then I feel I am still mediocre and uninteresting unless I do something else. Because even though I have become somebody, I still have to prove that I am somebody. My struggle has never ended, and I guess it never will." Whatever controls us is our God. Madonna expresses that she is controlled by the God of success and achievement. It gives her a sense of worth and value for life. Self-sufficiency is her idol. Idols have that power to control us. On one occasion in the New Testament, Jesus encounters a wealthy, powerful young man. This man is spiritually seeking. He wants to know more about the meaning of life. And Jesus tells him this incredible good news. He says, the opportunity for you here is right here. You could taste it. You just reach out and touch it. It's right here for you to grab. All you need to do is sell your stuff. And in all the different Gospels, we read this tragic line. When the young man heard this, he went away sad, for he had many possessions. His idol controlled him. He wants to come to Jesus. He made the effort to do that. But he walks away sad because his idol controls him. You know, we know that a good thing becomes a bad thing when it exceeds its boundaries, when it goes beyond where it's meant to be. And so we can have all sorts of idols that are fundamentally good, but they've gone beyond their boundaries and become gods when they have that control over us. Tim Keller puts it this way. He says, an idolatrous attachment can lead you to break any promise, rationalize any indiscretion, betray any other allegiance in order to hold on to it. It may drive you to violate all good and proper boundaries. To practice idolatry is to be a slave. It controls. This young man was controlled by his idol. What he thought he possessed instead possessed him. You know, if idols were once temples of ancient gods located on mountaintops, if they were Canaanite Baals or Roman gods like Jupiter or Mars or Apollo, if they were Greek gods, Zeus or Poseidon or Aphrodite, what are the names of the gods that we have in the 21st century? If they come in so many different shapes and sizes, if they have this ability to grab a hold of our heart, how do we name them? And I must admit, when I was jotting down these sort of things as I was thinking through this talk, there's kind of like these easy starting points. There's kind of these classic idols that we think about in modern life. Things like power or sex or success. But I think there's even more. One of the things that grabbed my mind as I was reading and thinking about this was greed. Greed is a sly idol. Did you know that Jesus warns people far more often about greed than about sex, and yet basically no one thinks that they're guilty of it? Maybe that's a warning in itself, that if we don't actually think about it like that, that it's got this sneaky way of working its way into our hearts and minds and life. I mean, if greed hides itself so deeply, we shouldn't be really confident that it's not a problem for us. Friedrich Nietzsche, the 20th century German philosopher, wrote that with the absence of God growing in Western culture, his hypothesis that we would replace God with money, that money in the Western culture would become its main idol, the greed and desire for more. As a pastor, people come and share with me their struggles in all sorts of different parts of life. Almost all parts of life. But I cannot recall anyone ever coming to me and saying, you know what, Andrew? I spend too much money on myself. I think my greedy lust for money is harming my family, my soul, and the people around me. I've never heard that conversation. Greed hides itself from the victims. It deceives. Research tells us that people with issues about greed and money never compare themselves with the rest of the world. We only compare ourselves with people who are one socio-economic bracket above ourselves. And now I can make a statement like this. This is a true statement. The fact that you are here this morning indicates that you are in the wealthiest 1 to 2% of the world. We live in Australia. We live in a suburb here. By default, we fall within that bracket. Now, of course, there are many different socio-economic brackets gathered around our area. ranging from kind of like probably lower middle, upper middle. That's kind of the area that we live in. But the research tells us that people never consider their circumstances against the broader group, only against the people who are one level higher. So the person who is in a job which is a significant income, let's say, for example, $200,000, when they're asked this question, do you consider yourself wealthy? The vast majority of them say no. When asked why in further questions, their immediate response is to compare themselves with those who are a bracket above. That's the way the human heart works. That's the way that greed works. It sneaks under our skin. And before we know it, it becomes our idol. Greed's not just about money. It also expresses itself in materialism, replacing God with things. It's a philosophy that says possessions will satisfy me. So I need to provide or I need to get more and more. But it's a trap, isn't it? Like most false idols, it falters. It leaves us empty and lonely, grasping for more, but never satisfied. Materialism has a cousin in consumerism, making a god out of consuming, the need to shop, the need for an expression of more. Not just shopping in terms of physical possessions, but in terms of experience. Most of us are part of a generation that has seen a movie like The Bucket List. An interesting movie, but The Bucket List has in many ways become a standard for people, and their search for these experiences will be the things that bring me satisfaction in life. They become our idol. See, one of the realities of idolatry is its power not only to have control over us, but to turn good things into God things. You see, some of us will make idols out of things that are positive parts of life. Some have an idol of marriage. If we place all of our hopes and expectations on a spouse, it can crush them, because no person, not even the best one, can give our soul all it needs. If you marry someone expecting them to be your God, you're going to be disappointed. You've passed more of that thing than it's able to give. You're asking it to do things that God alone can do. Or children. To idolize your children parallels idolizing a spouse. It's to place unrealistic expectations on them. If a child is there in our life and mind, in a sense, to give us a sense of value and meaning, it can move beyond what they are meant to do. It takes something that is fundamentally good and tries to elevate it to a god. Idols come in many shapes and forms. When anything is an absolute requirement for our happiness or self-worth, it's an idol that we're worshipping. So I want to ask you some questions today. I mean, you might say to me, Andrew, if idols are so dangerous and yet can be subtle or deceptive, how do I identify them? I look up to the mountains. Does my help come from where? In my life, I look up to the mountain. I look up to what do I see in my life that I have made into some form of idol. So I want to give us some questions just to chew over today. Here's the first one. What do you do with your solitude? When you're daydreaming, what occupies your mind? When you've got downtime, where does it go? How do you spend your money? It's a truism that we can always find money for that which we truly love. We can always find money for that which we truly love. What are your uncontrollable emotions? What triggers them? It's been said that one of the signs that an object is functioning as an idol is that fear becomes one of the chief characteristics of life. Because when we centre our lives on the idol, we become dependent on it. If our counterfeit God is threatened in any way, our response is panic. It's an expression saying if something is so important to us, if something says it's going to take it away, boom. What do you look to for significance and security? What do you fear that you could not live without? If something was taken away from you and you did not think you could go on in life, I had my heart invested in something. It was so important to me. So you can imagine if my job defines me, and I lose my job, do I have this sense of my life is over? If my wife, my husband, my children, you keep naming it, is my life over? I used to think that the first commandment was something that I could just brush over. But it almost feels like the older that I get, the more significant it is. To put something in God's place. So dangerous. It's so easy, I find, and I'm sure that in many ways you're the same. It's so easy for us to start to look to other things in life to give us hope or meaning or love. Then we begin to doom ourselves to heartbreak. And so I ask myself this question: if that happens to me, Andrew, if it happens to you, what do we do about it? And I just want to leave you today just with a couple of little quick things. The first thing is this, and I hope that maybe even today you've been able to potentially wrestle with this one. Firstly, I think it's important that we begin to identify if we have any idols in our life. To be able to identify it, to say, yes, you know what? This is a full-on, it's taking all of my heart idol. Or maybe this is something which I can feel it's starting to take more significance than it should. To be able to identify it, to be able to name it, to begin to understand that idol's power, but also in understanding its power, begin to see also its weakness. To see that not only does this give us some sort of burst of some sense of satisfaction or security or meaning, but you know what? When I name that, actually I can realise that that is a destructive path, or that idol will inevitably break down and falter. And so in naming that, in identifying that, it removes some of the fear and its hold and its grip over me. It helps me to begin to release it begin to be able to let it go. And can I say, much better for us to be able to let it go than to let God destroy the idol. Because sometimes that's what happens. I feel like God, in his mercy, sometimes destroys idols that we have. The second thing I would say to you is to name an idol, but also to be able to celebrate its goodness, but not its godness. Because as I've said, many things which are good, we can elevate to gods. We want to be able to celebrate their goodness, but not let it become a god. To recognize its position in life. And the final thing is simply this: to reorient our hearts. Because if we are looking all the time to the top of a mountain and seeing a particular idol, we need to reorient ourselves, no longer to look at the idol, but to look towards God. Psalm 97 expresses this beautifully. It says, "For you, O Lord, are supreme over all the earth. You are exalted above all gods." Here's this call for us to move from other things that would distract us in life and to look to the true living God above all. To exalt that God above all in all of life. To leave the other idols behind and look to God alone. The value, the way in which we express that in the life of our church is that for each of us, that we would be a people who are centered on God. Centered on God. It says exalting God and humbling ourselves. Not putting ourselves in that place of God. Not putting other idols in that place. But exalting God above all. Let's pray, shall we? I want to give you a short time today before I pray for you to consider, is there anything in your heart and mind that is elevating itself beyond where it should be? As we've been reflecting over these last minutes, is there something in your mind that kind of keeps appearing there? Some idol. It might be something that you feel like it's got a hold of me this tight and I need desperate help. It might be seeing something which you feel like in your life is starting to sprout and bud, and it might only feel a little bit small, but it's just starting to grow. Just want to give you some time to identify that and come before God with it. I look up to the mountains. Does my help come from there? No. My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. And our God, I pray that you would capture our hearts, capture our minds, our hopes, our expectations, that you would capture all of us. When we fear, that we would turn for you. When we look to the future, we would turn to you. You would be first in our hearts, first in our diary, first in our wallets, first in our families, first in our workplaces, that you above all would hold your position as the true and living God, and that we would exalt you. We would worship you above all else.